back to this Traverse Theatre web series where we are looking at the playwright's voice. So we're going to have a look at this kind of bit which is entitled How Your Voice Gets You Noticed. It's a little bit looser than that, but I'm hoping that we find something instructive. There will be quite a lot of talking in the second half of this workshop, so I'll give you a wee note when, and you can get a pen and some paper because I take some things down if you want, or you can just ignore what I'm saying. It's up to you. So what we've kind of went through already about what your voice kind of is, what it does, what it's doing, what you're using your voice to do, and how you're telling stories. I wanted to kind of talk a wee bit more about that, specifically about truth and narrative, and how those things are kind of, and how we need truth within narratives, especially when we're trying to tell stories. And then later on, we're going to talk about genre, and we're going to just kind of give you very quickly all the different genres and how I think genre can be a really good asset when it comes to using your voice in your stories. So in an ideal world, someone would pick up your script and know it was yours. They would be able to see the things that make you tick as an artist and how you like to explore your own stories and your own narratives, the way that you like to see the world. And that is kind of what your voice as an artist is doing, as a writer, is projecting those things out. And you want people to be able to pick up something and go, I know that this is your script, which would be great. Maybe you're someone who's coming to playwriting from other forms or other backgrounds. So there's been a lot of work, well, there always is a lot of work which incorporates poetry or spoken word or elements of maybe more contemporary practice and performance. These are things that you need to be using for your own base, your own knowledge to put into your writing. Because these are things that you know, and I don't think you should be afraid to use those and tap into those. And hopefully, if you're just starting that journey, that you already know that, and you're starting to integrate elements of those kind of different strands of performance, those different mediums into your work. There are a lot of different factors that contribute into your voice that we did kind of previously kind of touch on. That it's like some magical sort of intangible dust that gets sprinkled throughout your stories, which attributes it to you, and the audience kind of pick up on. And I guess I always worry about one of the big kind of anxiety points within my own work is thinking why people should care about it. And it's because it's the way that you see things, and it's unlike how other people see things. And we've said about having to lean into that, and that's kind of so important. And I have at the front of all my notebooks, do not be scared of drama, as a constant reminder to try and find the conflict that is integral to every play and every story that we see, because conflict drives drama, it drives performance. And I particularly myself, I sometimes try and shy away from that, but every time I'm re-editing, every time I'm looking at the script, I'm continually asking myself, what is the conflict? What are the different situations, the different types of conflict that are happening within the scene? So that's just something I do. But don't worry if your voice feels too different, and that's what sets you apart, and lean into it. I wanted to quickly talk about specificity and authenticity as well. So keep your narratives to an extent simple, especially, I guess, when you're planning, because it allows you to drive into that drama. And that simplicity can offer clarity as well, being able to pin things down for yourself and also for allowing the audience to engage with the work. Be specific with your characters and place. And I say that because, again, myself as a writer, I try to write the universal. So when things become too big and you lose that specificity, of particular characters or place or backgrounds or experiences. When you lose that, then I think you start to lose the kind of clarity of what you're wanting the story to do. So always think about the themes of the story, the things you're trying to pin down and explore. Then it allows you to bring your own voice and kind of layer that through and sprinkle it through the entirety of the work. Now, authenticity comes from experience and research. Again, I do question a lot when I'm making work of, I not necessarily allowed to make this work? Am I, is this something I should be talking about? And research and kind of intimate knowledge is obviously so important. And I don't want to spend a huge time going into the larger kind of final details or the complexities of the morality of what stories that we as artists can tell if they're not your own. But because I don't think that's necessarily a conversation that I can have with you here in this way, because I would just be telling you what I think. But what I would like to touch on is just different ways that you can try to find honesty and truth within your work. So challenging your own views. Think about who it is you're talking to and the audience that you're presenting the work to. In some cases, making yourself vulnerable first is good, because it means that you can use your own vulnerability safely within the work. Then that can be a good launching off point for interrogating the issues. Don't start the work with the issue. I would say, particularly if it is a kind of more conventional drama. Be careful not to create emotional barriers between yourself and the work, and therefore also the work and the audience. Just be aware of that. And if you can connect the work to your own, the work to your own life, then that kind of brings honesty and truth. And the reason I kind of keep saying truth is because one of the main stumbling blocks I have when I'm writing, particularly when it is a difficult subject, is that if you don't have an element of truth or honesty through research or well planned out work or knowing your characters, that it can really put a wall up. And if you're starting your next play, then and you're finding yourself stuck, then it could be that you don't know what each character wants. You don't know what the conflict is between them. And so I would say that finding the honesty and truth of each scene is so important. And it allows us to interrogate the topics and kind of really kind of dive in. One thing I think I tell myself as well is that your audience should not be lied to. It's just something I try and keep in mind. A lot of the work, whenever I'm making work, I'm trying to think of an audience's perspective and what they're experiencing as well. So, yeah. Finally on this, just be concise. Know what it is you're writing, and your voice will shine through that. But as part of that, be able to very effectively describe what you're writing to other people, because once people have a knowledge of how you make your work, how you like to write, how you see the world, how it will look and sound, the way your characters speak, the way that you propel action forward and events forward, and the scenarios you'd like to see, if you can build that in as an idea into people when you come to them with a new idea, if you can concisely tell them what that idea is, they will be able to recognize that that's something that worth keeping an eye out for, worth investing. And I think that's the best way to transmit yourself to other people, is by having people that have an awareness of what you do, how you like to do it, and then having the next thing very concisely kind of done with a hook. And then that means that people can take it away and kind of mull on that. So as a wee exercise, just for a bit of fun, just to break it up a bit, I would like you to boil down the plot of Hamlet down into a tweet in the original sense, so 140 characters. So if you can boil down Hamlet into 140 characters, see what you end up with, and then use that to then do it to other things, and do it to your last piece as well. So start off with Hamlet, and then next time, boil down your last play, short, long, whatever it is, and boil that down to a tweet as well. And just be as concise as you possibly can. And see you in a few minutes. Great. So now that you've done that, you should have a very concise kind of snapshot of Hamlet and your own, and hopefully your own piece as well. And I think it's definitely worth something considering moving forward when you're working on something, being able to condense work down so that you have a very kind of clear look at what it is, and it means it's very easy therefore to talk about your work to others and generate that interest about your work. Years ago, I did a workshop with the director Joe Douglas, and he did something that was I found really useful. I'm just going to share with you, Joe. If you are watching, it's yours. I'm just telling other people how great it was, but it was essentially the same thing, except you take a match and light the match, and you have to describe the kind of central premise, the most important thing about your work before you get burned by the matchstick. And it was great because it's quite a pressured environment. You don't want to burn your finger, so you do kind of have to just do it. And it's a really useful way of pinning down again what the theme and the central consideration is, and then allowing you to dive into that. But there are so many different ways to tell narratives. I think that when we're starting off that new work, sometimes we can feel really lost by the sheer the number of options that we have, the ways that we can choose to tell things, the form that they can take, and it can become quite daunting to then find that right form for the way that you want to tell your work. And a lot of times, the form of the work is a big part of voice, because that will allow you to tell the stories you want to tell, and in the ways you want to tell them. Take time to then think about what the best way is to tell the story that you want to tell, and the best way to get your voice across. If that's not something you've pinned down in the first one, have a think about, again, we spoke about this before, but the plays that you love, the things you love to see, how you want to tell stories, and just go for it and find use form to your advantage, which kind of leads us into the next part, which is this kind of longer part. So I'm going to talk for quite a bit right now, but I'll try and be as clear as possible. And if you want to take notes, that's great. But I think a really useful thing to think about when it comes to the form of the work is thinking about genre, and how we can use genre as a tool for originality and to take a lot of weight for how we use our voice. Now, I wanted this workshop to be useful for people who are taking that next step, who are working with something new, maybe something bigger, longer, more complex. And considering genre to do this is really useful, because it can just take it by having, what the genre is that you're kind of initially thinking of. There's kind of tips and tricks and plot points, and you can put, you understand where your act 1, act 2, act 3, and where your midpoint is, and rising action, all these things. Now, I can't go into too much detail about that because we just don't really have the time, but there are many great resources that you can have. Stephen Jeffries' Playwriting is a fantastic book. It's well worth a read. John York, How Stories Work, that is also brilliant. David Edgar, How to Write a Play, I think is also really good. So they will kind of give you a lot of what I'm going to say. But it's definitely worth considering genre. Now, some people think that the genres will inhibit them, and I think that's a bit misguided. What we can do is use genre just as a framework, and then put your own voice onto it. So, and that's very original, and that will create originality. So, certain genres demand different things of narrative and structure, but genre can help you formulate a plot. Don't be afraid of it. I would say find out where yours kind of fits, and then use that to your advantage. Think of genre maybe as a safe space to play, that you can take the constituent parts and open them up. Now, I guess what we need to do is talk briefly, as quick as possible, what are the different genres. Now, I tried to pin this down to theatre. There is also, I guess, a crossover with other forms of storytelling, like prose and film also, because I guess there is that kind of crossover there. But so these are the ones that I was thinking of. So I'll start off with like personal drama, which is also broken into a couple of subgenres. But characters who are trying to create change in the world, up against it. A character who cannot be put down, they won't go away, they take on challenges and overcome them and progress and change as that happens. Generally, these stories are told in a linear way, however, episodic, so we can jump forward in time. We see that a lot within kind of drama on our stages. That they go through enormous change, and in order to get to their last goal, that they then have to overcome or break through, and that will change them irreparably. Now, that's personal, so that might be like a single protagonist, and it's maybe an inner, or it's focused solely on them. We also have domestic dramas, which are stories about relationships. The central problem is a threat to their world. And any secondary characters that are also invited to that story, they will cause problems for those main characters. Also, a lot of those dramas are domestic scenes, so they will happen within homes, living rooms, kitchens, etc. A lot of the time, there's a thematic theme towards validation, that someone is looking for validation or the relationship needs validation. That's always quite useful. I would then say that thriller kind of can follow that. So it's a mystery that needs to be solved. A character is facing death. Usually the forces of antagonism are very clever. There's an innocence at risk, usually in thrillers. And thematically, they seem centre on injustice. And also, we've got horrors and ghosts. Now, horror plays, to be really scared in a theatre is, I think, a joyous thing and something that a lot of us like. I hate horror films, but seeing scary plays is brilliant. But an ordinary world that we have a protagonist, an ordinary world that the protagonist arrives from into something else. There's usually a supernatural force who's stronger and smarter. There's, again, facing death within it. A fear of death and a fear of the inhuman, the presence of innocence and the knowledge of an expert usually kind of is in the kind of horror genre and is cool stuff to play with. Now, with ghost stories, they don't necessarily need to be scary. There can always be a ghost story where that it's still within that sort of genre, but with the ghost story, it could be quite emotional. It could be people reconnecting, but there's still actually quite a lot of similarities between those other kind of points. Biopics, that's a genre, I would say. It's a subgenre because it's usually centered around some form of drama, personal, domestic, or some other story, like autobiographical thing. So, that kind of can play. There's another element of drama, like another type of subgenre of drama, domestic drama or personal drama, is rites of passage stories, which usually, again, kind of similar notes, big characters going through big change, but usually this is at formative years or years of their lives where things are in flux, maybe groups of teenagers, and sometimes we've seen rites of passage stories with older people as well. Now, there's usually the journey is not only like I was going to say spiritual, but it also is physical, that we see a movement of place. There are settings, scene to scene, change quite rapidly. I've got romance as well, which we can all think of one famous romance play, I'm sure. Two central characters, both involved in romance story, and there's also in many ways some tragic romance, something pulling them apart. There could be a triangular aspect, so there's a third person, in which case that would also be, so it's a three-hander, that would also be, maybe they need to be, that character needs to have the same standards. They all need to have an equal foot, equal stakes within the work. Two themes, quite common, the desire for love and the desire for pleasure. Now, another form of drama is communal, where you've got a lot of people, a lot of protagonists who are kind of together and are in conflict with community. With the community, so there's people together within a community and there's a conflict between them. It's usually restricted to community setting. I've seen plays that were in abandoned churches or community halls and or sign groups or something, and that could be a communal drama. And then usually that community is accepted, or I've had in other cases there's scenarios where they have to choose to leave. We could also have epic theatre, which we usually have societies at war, not particular communities. Huge location changes, broad scale, troped characters, sometimes reduced almost to a farcical nature. And like when you have archetypal characters like that sometimes that can be what happens and is used in order to engage with the audience members. And it has an ambition to give more than a sensory experience. So usually they might have a political aspect as well. And which also ties into, I would say, historical plays, which are actions from past significant events, and also verbatim theatre as well, where it's a political dimension attached to the work. We hear real voices, and those voices usually have a connection around some event or moment in time, and there's a sense of provocation about the work that verbatim theatre obviously is putting something in front of us for us to consider in a theatre environment. And last, or no least, is musicals. Plays with music, plays with song, song, dialogue, comedy, pathos, love, anger, all the emotions, but kind of put in song. So that was a very quick breakdown of what I consider the theatre genres. Now, I wasn't able to tell you plot by plot how each one works or when new things get introduced. That's definitely something to look in for yourself. But I think it's worth considering what your play is, how you want to engage with your audience, how you're using different aspects. Think about what genre it is, and that means that it can carry so much of the weight from you, and just keep it to one side. Write down what that conventional structure is, and then try to attach your work to it and overlay it. Write down the plot points for your work, put it on top, and see if it matches. If it doesn't, then you can track that journey, and then throw the genre bit away, and then put your voice into it, the way you do things, the way that you're moving in from scene to scene, the characters you're choosing to depict and explore. And that means that you can, I think, hopefully quite quickly, at least with a lot of strength, find what that work, your new work, where it sits and how it works as well within itself. So, and one thing I didn't mention, I guess, was comedy, because I guess comedy, I would say, is possibly not a genre, it's a tone. So if you've got a comedic voice, then no matter what genre you pick, you're probably going to have a lot of comedy. That's one thing that always happens in mine. Kind of comedy, will always appear in the most kind of the saddest of scene. So I would say, so if that's what it is, don't hide away from that. I would say use it, just be aware of when the right time is, and maybe pull back when you need to as well. So I had a wee exercise just to finish this off for today. And you can obviously take your time with this, and it will take, I think, a bit of time. So there isn't a time limit on it. But I want you to take your favourite play, and I want you to, first of all, think about what genre of work it is, how the writer's voice connects with that genre. So how you can still hear what your writer is, and particularly if you know what their work, other pieces of the work as well, because you can see how the pieces might be different, but you can still see what the writer is. And then I want to take your play and take down the plot points as well. And just have a think about using your plot points and seeing those genres, what genre it is, as we kind of spoke about as well. And the last point is take that favourite play and just try to imagine what it would look like as a different genre, how that would change different elements, how the story might work, what the shape of it is, if characters, what would happen to characters if they were in a completely different type of play, but still with the same sort of plot points, the same story, but just try to subvert things a little bit and just have a think about how genre works, how it works underneath the voice of the writer or the play that you've chosen. And then I will see you for the next episode. Thanks very much.